Look at the woman sitting at table 4. The lighting in this bistro is soft, amber, forgiving. She is smiling. It's a gentle, tilted smile that signals total warmth. Across from her, a man in a well-fitted wool sweater leans in. He just finished a charming story about his childhood dog. It worked. He takes a sip of his bourbon. He feels the current. He thinks this is happening. Now look closer. Watch her left hand. It rests on the white tablecloth, 2 inches from her phone. When he mentioned 90 seconds ago that his tech startup was still seeking its first round of funding, her thumb gave a single microscopic twitch. When he laughed just a fraction too loudly at his own joke, her pupils didn't dilate. They fixed. She leans forward. She touches his forearm. It looks like an act of tender surrender. It isn't. It is a closing audit. Behind that warm, dark iris, a silent ledger is rebalancing. Her brain just weighed his jawline and his charm against the high-risk yield of an unproven business model. The math yielded a negative spread. She will let him pay for the C-base. She will kiss him on the cheek by the subway grating. And she will never answer his texts again. She is not a sociopath. She is not broken. She is simply a highly optimized market participant. Sitting there in the candlelight, we aren't watching the failure of modern romance. We are watching its supreme rational perfection. But what happens to the human psyche when the quiet sanctuary between two beating hearts is finally swallowed whole by the cold mechanics of the trading floor?
You know, what you are witnessing in that bistro right at this very moment, it's not some isolated psychological anomaly. If you are sitting across the room watching this unfold, you have to understand that this is a profound displacement.
Right. It's a complete shift.
Exactly. You are watching the absolute colonization of the intimate sphere by the rational actor model, the architecture of the marketplace. So supply, demand, risk assessment, yield, it's all been fully internalized within the human heart.
And as you observe that dynamic, it forces a complete reevaluation of what we think romance even is. We have this culturally ingrained assumption, right, that romantic connection is this last remaining sanctuary from the world of capital.
Oh, absolutely. We like to think of the office or the stock market, the gig economy, as the places where we are evaluated and judged.
Yes, and we think of the date at table 4 as the escape from all of that.
But the exact opposite has occurred.
Yeah.
The intimate sphere hasn't just adopted the language of the market, it has become the ultimate optimization problem.
Well, let's move from that restaurant to another space, another moment of silent calculation that happens, millions of times every single night. So it is 11 o'clock in a modern, brightly lit urban apartment. The sterile, white glare of a bathroom mirror reflects a person meticulously examining their own face. They are adjusting the angles, tilting their chin just a fraction of an inch, finding the exact degree of artificial ring light to capture the perfect image. They're carefully editing a digital biography on their phone.
Ah, yes, the curation phase.
Consciously pairing these precise physical aesthetics with a highly curated list of career achievements and lifestyle markers. A photo of them hiking in Patagonia, a casual mention of their postgraduate degree, maybe a perfectly timed joke.
Just casually throwing those assets out there.
Exactly, assets. The air in that room is thick with a specific kind of interpersonal anxiety, a silent, pervasive hum of fluctuating market worth. Because in this late-night curation, we are watching a profound psychological collision.
And that collision, it's between a mid-century psychological concept and our hardwired biological reality. What we are seeing in front of that bathroom mirror is the manifestation of what the social psychologist Erich Fromm identified decades ago as the marketing orientation.
The marketing orientation, right.
But it is colliding violently with the inescapable realities of evolutionary mate value. When you stare into the glare of that screen, curating your identity, love is completely exposed.
Exposes what exactly?
Well, it is no longer a transcendent, mystical escape from capitalistic logic. It is revealed to be a rigid, highly liquid market of quantifiable assets.
I want to break that down completely because applying a phrase like marketing orientation to human emotion feels so clinical.
It is very clinical. Yeah.
What exactly did Fromm mean by that? And how does it explain the anxiety of the person standing in front of the mirror?
To understand the marketing orientation, you have to look at how human beings historically conceptualize their own value. For centuries, if you asked someone what gave them worth, they would point to their character.
Their character, or their soul, their craftsmanship, maybe their role in a community.
Right. The value was intrinsic. It existed whether anyone else was looking at it or not.
Huh.
But Fromm argued that as modern market capitalism evolved, It fundamentally changed human psychology.
So the psychology actually shifted to match the economy.
Under the marketing orientation, the individual no longer experiences themselves as a human being with intrinsic, incalculable value. Instead, they begin to view themselves as a personality package.
So literally a commodity, like a product sitting on a shelf waiting to be purchased.
Exactly like a commodity. And what happens to a commodity?
It has to be sold.
It must be continuously prepared, polished, and brought to the market. Life energy, which we historically conceptualized as spontaneous, authentic, and expressive, completely transforms into an investment portfolio. Think about the person in the apartment. They're looking at their face, their hobbies, their degrees, not as experiences they enjoyed, but as assets in a portfolio.
And like any investment portfolio, it demands the highest possible return based on the current conditions of exchange. So the person in front of that mirror isn't just a romantic hopeful. They are effectively a day trader.
A day trader where the asset is themselves.
They are looking at the market, seeing that hiking in Patagonia is currently trading high, and making sure it's prominently featured in the prospectus.
And that generates incredible psychological alienation. When you are the trader and the traded assets simultaneously, you become entirely detached from your own authenticity.
Because you're just adjusting to the market.
Right. Your personality becomes whatever the market demands it to be today.
But let's look at what the market is actually demanding. Because it's not just arbitrary cultural trends, right? This isn't just a critique of modern capitalism or social media. This psychological state perfectly mirrors the cold empirical math of modern evolutionary realism.
That's where the biology comes in.
Exactly. When we break down this personality package that Fromm talked about, we're really just looking at the components of mate value as evolutionary biology defines it.
That is where the collision happens. The marketing orientation is the psychological software, but evolutionary mate value is the biological hardware.
So when biologists assess mate value, what are they actually looking at?
They're looking at quantifiable capital. It is not subjective. It is heavily rooted in millions of years of evolutionary selection. You can divide this into two main categories: physical capital and resource capital.
Let's unpack the physical capital first, because that is what is being audited in the bathroom mirror, right? When we say physical capital, we aren't just saying prettiness. We are talking about specific, ruthless biological markers.
Very ruthless. We are talking about markers of fecundity, phenotypic fitness, and developmental stability. Okay, for instance, facial symmetry. Biologically, facial symmetry is a signal to a potential mate that you have strong pathogen resistance and healthy DNA that hasn't been disrupted by disease or malnutrition during development.
Wow. So it's literally a health audit.
Body mass index, waist to hip ratios, shoulder to waist ratios, clear skin, hair quality, these are all phenotypic expressions of genetic health. They signal to the deep unconscious parts of the brain that this person will produce viable offspring.
So when the woman at the bistro at table 4 was evaluating the man's jawline, her brain was running a subconscious audit on his testosterone levels and genetic fitness.
Without her even realizing it.
And when you pair that physical capital with resource capital, the equation becomes even more complex.
Absolutely. Resource capital encompasses social status, provisioning capacity, earning potential, and socioeconomic standing.
And these aren't just abstract qualities or like nice bonuses. They are the literal currency being weighed and leveraged in the market.
And that is why the fundamental nature of interpersonal attraction has completely shifted under this framework. We like to think of attraction as a transcendent mystery, right? An ineffable pull toward another soul.
The fairy tale version.
But when you look through the lens of the financialized self, attraction ceases to be mysterious at all. It becomes a subconscious, hyper-fast calculation of compatibility between two distinct balance sheets.
Wait, are you saying that when two people lock eyes across a room, what's actually happening is a rapid exchange of market data?
The brain is processing the physical capital, so the symmetry, the fitness, and combining it with whatever resource capital is immediately visible.
The cut of the wool sweater.
Right, the sweater, the posture, the confidence, the verbal indicators of status. It calculates all of this in milliseconds and compares it against your own self-assessed mate value.
And if the math checks out?
If the math checks out, you feel attraction.
But if it doesn't?
If the math yields a negative spread, as it did for the woman at the bistro when she realized his startup was unproven and high risk, the attraction instantly evaporates.
The pupil fixation, the microscopic thumb twitch.
That is the physical manifestation of the ledger rebalancing and the deal falling through.
That makes the pursuit of a partner sound less like a search for a soulmate and more like a mutual defense pact.
The term often used in sociology for this is egotism ada, an egotism for two. Under this market logic, two individuals pair up not to achieve some genuine, selfless, boundary-dissolving union.
They're not becoming one soul.
They pair up to form a mutually beneficial alliance. They are pooling their accumulated assets, their combined physical and resource capital, to defend their unified market position against an alienated, competitive world.
You know, as you explain this, I can't help but see it exactly like a corporate merger. Let's really push this analogy.
I think it's a very fitting analogy.
You have two separate entities, the man and the woman. They each have their own board of directors in their heads.
Yeah, right, weighing the pros and cons.
They analyze each other's balance sheets. They look at the physical assets, the liquid capital, the projected quarterly earnings of their respective careers.
And they look for synergies.
Exactly, synergies. Maybe she provides the high status aesthetic capital, and he provides the stable resource capital. They agree to integrate their operations because they realize their combined market capitalization will be higher together than their individual valuations apart.
They can afford a better mortgage.
They get invited to better parties.
Their social standing rises. That is a highly accurate way to view the modern matrimonial contract under market logic. It is a merger based on the optimization of combined assets.
But here's the big question. If modern love is essentially a corporate merger, what happens during the inevitable market crash?
The crash.
Because bodies are not fixed assets, right? Careers are not fixed assets.
Yeah.
If the entire foundational logic of the pairing is quantifiable capital, what occurs when one partner ages or loses their job or suffers a severe drop in their physical or resource capital?
It creates a crisis.
Say someone gets chronically ill, or their startup actually fails and they go bankrupt. Does the merger instantly dissolve because the valuation is no longer accurate?
That precise vulnerability is exactly what generates the chronic interpersonal anxiety hanging in the air of that late-night apartment. You asked earlier why that person in the mirror is so anxious.
Yeah, the tension in the room.
It is because they know subconsciously that the merger is always contingent. Because the self has become entirely financialized, any drop in status or physical appeal is not just a temporary personal setback. It is felt as an existential threat to one's market viability.
Because if your value drops, your partner's return on investment drops. You basically become a toxic asset.
If you view yourself as a personality package brought to market, you know that the market owes you nothing if your value depreciates. This architecture forces the individual into a state of constant, exhausting self-optimization. You have to keep going to the gym, you have to keep getting promoted, you have to keep curating the perfect lifestyle.
So the relationship itself becomes work.
The maintenance of the relationship requires endless mutual auditing to ensure the exchange rate remains favorable. It leaves absolutely no room for the unconditional security that love historically promised.
So the sanctuary is completely gone. You never get to take off the armor. You are just managing a brand, even in your own living room.
Even with the person you supposedly love most.
And we see this structural audit taking place not just in individual apartments, but across entire societies on a massive demographic scale. To understand the sheer magnitude of this market logic, we need to shift our focus from the micro to the macro.
Looking at the broader demographic trends is crucial.
So we are leaving the urban apartment. It is May 2026. Picture a sun-baked university courtyard in Harare, Zimbabwe.
Quite a different scene.
The air is thick with red dust and the deafening rhythmic sound of joyous ululations from proud families. Look closely at the sea of graduates standing there, sweating in heavy black gowns under the midday heat. Here is the vital statistic. For every 3 men standing in that courtyard, there are 7 women holding degrees.
A 70-30 ratio.
The joyous, vibrant celebrations completely mask a profound, invisible structural tremor taking place beneath their feet. Right here, in the dust of this courtyard, a dialectical contradiction is materializing in real time.
And it's a contradiction that's tearing at the fabric of society.
The undeniable, celebrated educational advancement of these women is actively reinforcing their deeply ingrained hypergamous preferences. And in doing so, it is creating a severe structural mismatch that is silently, steadily collapsing the traditional matrimonial contracts of their entire society.
This is where the evolutionary hardware creates a system-wide crash when introduced to modern macroeconomic realities.
So how does that crash happen?
Well, to understand why this courtyard in Zimbabwe represents a global crisis, we have to deeply understand the mechanics of hypergamy, which are rooted in parental investment theory.
Let's break down parental investment theory. Why does the biological hardware dictate these specific preferences?
Parental investment theory, which was pioneered by the evolutionary biologist Robert Trivers, looks at the asymmetric costs of reproduction.
Asymmetric meaning it costs one sex more than the other.
In human beings, the female biological investment in offspring is massive. 9 months of gestation, the metabolic cost of lactation, the prolonged vulnerability during pregnancy and early child rearing.
It's a huge physical and temporal commitment.
Because the biological cost and risk are so disproportionately high for the female, evolutionary psychology dictates that female mate selection will be highly rigorous and risk-averse.
So she cannot afford to make a bad investment, biologically.
Exactly. Therefore, hypergamy developed as the cross-cultural female preference for mates who exhibit signs of superior status, resources, and physical protection. It functions as a biological risk mitigation strategy to ensure security and survival for the offspring. The institutional expectation, built up over thousands of generations and codified in almost every patriarchal marriage structure on Earth, is that a woman will marry a man of equal or higher educational and economic status.
So the whole system is built on that premise.
The entire system assumes, and in fact relies upon, male superiority in these specific resource-gathering domains for the market to clear.
But the macroeconomic disruption we are seeing in that courtyard completely invalidates that foundational assumption. The global inversion of educational and economic attainment is staggering. This scene in Zimbabwe, where 70% of university enrollment is female compared to 30% male, serves as a perfect concentrated microcosm for a much broader global trend. If we look at OECD data worldwide, women are consistently outpacing men in tertiary education across the board. In urban centers around the world, the wage gap among young, childless professionals is rapidly closing, and in many major metropolitan areas, it has entirely reversed. Women are entering the mating market with unprecedented levels of resource capital.
And this is exactly where the dialectical contradiction occurs. You would logically think that as women acquire more of their own resources, their requirement for a mate with resources would decrease, that they would prioritize other traits.
Like kindness or shared interests, since they already have the money.
But the evolutionary hardware is stubborn. The data shows that even as women achieve higher economic and educational status, their hypergamous preference, their desire for a man who out-earns them and out-educates them, does not diminish.
It stays the same.
In many cases, it actually intensifies.
Oh, so they have leveled up in the market, but their biological algorithm is still demanding a partner who is at a level above them, which leads to a severe market gridlock.
Sociologists and demographers refer to this as the marriage squeeze.
I want to walk through the raw mathematics of this squeeze, because it is fascinating and brutal. What happens when the evolutionary drive for a demographically superior partner meets a reality where such men are statistically scarce?
The market simply fails to clear its inventory. Let's use the ratio from the courtyard in Harar to make the math visible. Imagine a mating market of 100 women and 100 men. In this market, 70 of the women hold university degrees and possess high earning potential. Only 30 of the men hold degrees.
Okay.
Because of the hypergamous drive, those 70 highly educated women are primarily interested in marrying men who are at least as educated, if not more so.
So you have 70 buyers competing for 30 available assets.
Highly educated women suddenly find themselves facing highly constrained choices. They're forced to compete intensely against one another for a tiny, shrinking fraction of elite males who meet the traditional hypergamous criteria.
What happens to the other 70 men, the average earning or less educated males?
They are systemically excluded from the long-term mating market entirely. The hypergamous filter screens them out at the very beginning of the sorting process. They become invisible to the educated female cohort.
This demographic crisis feels exactly like a broken real estate market. Let's look at the buyers in the inventory.
I like this analogy.
You have a massive influx of highly qualified buyers entering the market with ample capital. These are the educated women. They have the degrees, they have the salaries, they're ready to invest. But they are entering a market where they absolutely refuse to purchase anything less than a penthouse suite.
Because the biological hardware dictates that they must live in the penthouse.
The problem is those penthouses, the elite, high-earning men, simply do not exist in sufficient numbers to house all the buyers. Meanwhile, you have thousands of perfectly good, functional, structurally sound, middle-class homes, the average earning males sitting completely empty. They are totally ignored by the market because they don't meet the luxury specifications.
It's a perfect storm of supply and demand failure.
So how does a society possibly cope with a market that absolutely refuses to lower its evolutionary asking price?
The initial result is massive institutional collapse. Because the math doesn't work, the transactions stop happening. Across the globe, but particularly visible in rapidly developing economies where this educational shift happened very quickly, we see plummeted marriage rates.
People just stop getting married.
We see a steeply rising age of first marriage as women hold out longer and longer, searching the market for a penthouse that might become available. And we see a massive surge in prolonged involuntary singlehood for both the highly educated women who refuse to settle and the less educated men who are excluded.
But here is where the structural mechanics become deeply paradoxical and frankly quite dark. Because of the extreme scarcity of these highly educated elite men, the market dynamics shift leverage in entirely counterintuitive ways.
This is a crucial point regarding supply and demand. Because the elite men are in such high demand by such a large pool of highly qualified women, those few men gain disproportionate bargaining power in the mating market.
Even though the women as a demographic have gained immense power, the individual elite man suddenly holds all the cards.
Their statistical scarcity allows them to dictate the terms of the relationship. We see these highly sought-after men demanding traditional gender roles, domestic submission, and asymmetrical compromises, despite the fact that the women possesses equal or even higher economic status.
Really, so the progress kind of backfires.
The demographic progress of women does not automatically weaken the patriarchal structure. In these specific bottlenecks, it actually reorganizes it by granting the scarce elite males unprecedented leverage to negotiate terms that reproduce male dominance.
We see this tension intensely manifesting in cultural traditions that attempt to mediate the market, like the Zimbabwean practice of bride wealth or lobola.
A fascinating example of market disruption.
Historically, this was a clear economic transaction. The groom's family transfers resources to the bride's family to compensate them for the loss of her labor and reproductive capacity. It was an institution built entirely on male resource superiority. But what happens to lobola when the woman has a higher net worth than the man trying to pay it?
The practice undergoes extreme pressure and begins to fracture. Highly educated, financially independent women increasingly resist the practice.
I can imagine.
If they view themselves as economically sovereign, the idea of a man transferring wealth to acquire them feels like a symbol of ownership that fundamentally contradicts their lived reality. On the other side, the men who are trying to fulfill this cultural mandate often lack the economic means to do so because their earning power has been eclipsed by the very women they're trying to marry.
So the market mechanism breaks the cultural tradition.
It forces it to adapt. In many cases, the lobola is forced to become a purely symbolic gesture, stripped of its original economic rationale. Sometimes the woman herself secretly provides the funds to the man so he can publicly pay her family.
She pays for her own bride wealth.
Yes, maintaining the illusion of the traditional patriarchal structure while entirely subverting its economic reality.
That secret funding of the bride wealth perfectly illustrates how individuals are trying to navigate this impossible gridlock. And that brings us to how society ultimately copes with this, because people still want companionship. The biological drive to pair up doesn't just disappear because the math is bad.
No, the drive is relentless. So society copes through a sociological mechanism known as normative lag.
Normative lag.
This concept explains what happens when rapidly changing material realities collide with slow-moving cultural values. Behavioral adaptation always happens first, out of sheer necessity. Cultural acceptance lags far behind, sometimes by decades.
So what is the behavioral adaptation we are seeing in this broken real estate market? If the penthouses are full, where do the buyers go?
Eventually, out of necessity, a demographic shift occurs. Women slowly begin to adjust their behavior by marrying men of equal or lower educational and economic status. Sociologically, this practice is known as hypogamy, the opposite of hypergamy, or it manifests as assortative mating where people just match within their exact same peer group.
But because of normative lag, they aren't happy about it.
The behavior occurs because the brutal market forces dictate it. There are simply no other options if they wish to form a family. But because the cultural ideal, the evolutionary hardware, still demands hypergamy, this new behavior remains heavily stigmatized.
It's seen as settling.
It is not publicly celebrated. It is negotiated in private.
And that creates a massive psychological burden inside the home. You have a massive gap between what people actually do to survive the market and what the culture still idealizes as a successful pairing.
Which creates deep, often unspoken inter-household conflicts.
You have women out-earning their husbands, but feeling deep evolutionary resentment that they are not being provided for. You have men who are contributing to the household, but suffering an absolute crisis of breadwinning identity, feeling chronically disrespected because they aren't fulfilling the traditional male role.
The relationship becomes a site of constant tension, a negotiation over authority and respect that is completely divorced from the actual economic reality of the partnership.
The exhaustion of that normative lag, the sheer friction of trying to negotiate a broken macro market, pushes individuals to seek more efficient ways to solve the problem. They look for a technological bypass.
And that is where the architecture of dating completely transforms.
And that brings us to the third and final sensory environment. We have looked at the micro-anxiety of the mirror. We have looked at the macro gridlock of the courtyard. Now we look at the mechanism of escape.
The digital realm.
It is a rainy Tuesday evening in a dimly lit apartment in Copenhagen. The persistent, heavy drumming of rain against the window pane is the only sound in the room. It accompanies the rhythmic, microscopic twitch of a thumb against glass. Swiping left, swiping right. The pale blue glow of a smartphone screen illuminates a face locked in a state of gamified trance. The eyes are dull, the posture is slumped.
We've all seen that posture.
This moment, replicated across hundreds of millions of screens globally, represents the transformative pivot from the traditional romantic sanctuary to the digital panopticon. Dating has been reduced to a gamified scroll, an endless cascade of faces where the illusion of infinite choice actively depreciates the very concept of relational commitment. The pursuit of human connection has been transformed into an exercise of profound emotional fatigue.
To understand why that person swiping in Copenhagen looks so entirely drained, we have to look at the economic architecture of digital platforms like Tinder, Bumble, and Hinge. These apps do not simply facilitate dating, they fundamentally alter the market structure. They operate as pure, frictionless markets.
Let's define frictionless. Because historically, dating was entirely defined by friction. Human mating behavior was intensely constrained by spatial boundaries. You could only marry someone in your village, your church, or your university.
Right, the geographic pool was tiny.
It was constrained by social reputation networks. If you treated someone poorly, their cousin would tell your boss, and your reputation would be ruined. And it was constrained by the high temporal and social costs of courtship. Approaching someone at a bar requires physical courage. Facing rejection in front of your peers carries a massive psychological cost. That is friction.
And friction slows down the market. It forces deliberation. It forces people to heavily weigh the costs and benefits of initiating a connection.
So what do the apps do?
What these platforms do is technologically eliminate all of that friction. You can swipe on 100 people from the safety of your couch. There is no public rejection. There is no social accountability because the people you are swiping on do not exist within your geographic or social community.
It's totally detached.
By removing the friction, these apps expose human interaction to the raw, unmediated forces of supply and demand.
It creates an environment where individuals are evaluated, categorized, and discarded with ruthless industrial efficiency. And when you look at the quantitative reality of these frictionless platforms, the data is absolutely brutal. We are looking at what can be described as a severe Gini coefficient of desire.
The Gini coefficient is traditionally an economic metric used to measure wealth inequality within a nation.
Right, where a high Gini coefficient means a tiny fraction of the population holds almost all the wealth, while the majority holds nothing.
What sociologists and data scientists have found is that dating apps exhibit an extreme Gini coefficient, but instead of wealth, it is a hoarding of attention and desire.
Let's explain how that hoarding actually works on the app, because it comes back to the physical capital we discussed at the bathroom mirror. In a frictionless digital space, you don't have access to someone's charm, their humor, or their social standing in a community.
You only have a two-dimensional image.
Which means the evaluation is almost entirely skewed toward visual appearance. This triggers a psychological phenomenon known as the halo effect, where our brains automatically assume that because someone is highly physically attractive, they must also be smart, funny, and reliable.
Because the platform relies on rapid visual sorting, the statistical distribution of attention becomes incredibly concentrated.
It is the Pareto principle on steroids. We aren't just talking about the 80-20 rule. The data from these major platforms shows a massive concentration of female selection, focusing almost exclusively on the extreme upper decile of male phenotypes.
The top 10%.
You have a vast majority of the female user base competing for the top 5 to 10% of men, the men who possess the absolute highest markers of physical and aesthetic capital.
While the bottom 80% of men on the platforms receive almost zero engagement. The platform architecture effectively treats its users not as complex human individuals, but as commodified inventory to be rapidly sorted. The top decile of inventory is aggressively consumed, while the vast majority of the inventory sits completely untouched in the warehouse.
Which creates distinct miseries for both groups. The bottom 80% of men experience complete market exclusion and invisible isolation. But the top decile of men, and the women competing for them, experience a different kind of psychological damage.
And this brings us to the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman and his concept of liquid love.
Liquid love.
Bauman draws a very sharp distinction between love and desire. How does a frictionless market change our orientation between those two states?
How do you define them?
Bauman argues that desire is an inherently destructive force. Desire seeks to consume the object. Once the object is consumed, once the novelty is gone, the desire dissipates and moves on to the next object. Love, historically, is the opposite. Love seeks to possess, to build, to care for, and to preserve the object over time.
So love is an investment.
The frictionless market of the dating app encourages desire at the complete expense of love. It makes love structurally inefficient.
Because love requires time and friction to build, whereas desire can be instantly gratified by the next match.
And behavioral economics explains this constant deferment of love through the concept of choice overload and option value.
Let's apply option value to the person sitting in Copenhagen. Say they actually go on a date with a match. They are sitting across from a real human being. The person is nice, but maybe they chew a little too loudly or their joke fell flat. They have flaws.
In a historical high-friction market, you would likely overlook those minor flaws because the cost of finding another partner is so high. You invest in the realized utility of the person sitting in front of you.
But in the frictionless digital market,
you have an endless catalog of potential partners sitting right in your pocket. The option value of the theoretical next match, the person you haven't swiped on yet, who is perfectly idealized in your mind and has no flaws, always appears higher than the realized messy utility of the current human connection.
The phantom next match always wins the cost-benefit analysis. This constant availability of a potentially better trade normalizes awful interpersonal behavior. It normalizes withdrawal at the first sign of friction. It normalizes ghosting, because why formally end a relationship when you could just delete the chat and swipe again?
It's the path of least resistance.
It leads to the rise of undefined situationships, where people refuse to commit because committing means closing their market position and giving up the option value of the endless scroll. It is a steady, systemic erosion of any capacity for long-term commitment.
It destroys the very foundation of bonding.
As we dissect this, I keep looking at the platform architecture itself, the way the interface is designed, the swiping motion, the intermittent notifications. It operates exactly like a casino slot machine.
Oh, it's very deliberate.
You pull the lever, you swipe right. But occasionally, unpredictably, the screen flashes, it says it's a match, you get a burst of colors. Are these platforms fundamentally designed against successful pairing? Because from a business perspective, a successful pairing means 2 users delete the app. It means 2 lost customers. A functioning dating app is a business model that is actively trying to destroy its own user base.
So they have to prevent you from leaving.
It seems the architecture thrives precisely on keeping the user in a continuous state of alienation. It is designed to extract their attention and their dopamine, rather than ever facilitating an actual exit from the market.
You have identified the exact mechanism of the digital panopticon. It utilizes what psychologists call variable ratio reinforcement schedules. This is the exact same psychological conditioning used in gambling.
Hooking the user.
The unpredictability of the reward, the match, keeps the brain hooked, flooding it with dopamine just frequently enough to prevent the user from putting the phone down, and that is the core of the alienation.
The sociologist Hartmut Rosa describes this through his theory of social acceleration. Can you explain how acceleration theory applies to the fatigue we feel after an hour on these apps?
Rosa argues that in late-stage modernity, the pace of technological and social change accelerates to the point where individuals can no longer meaningfully integrate their experiences.
This is fast.
Applied to the dating market, users become intensely alienated from their own actions. They engage in hours of swiping. They view hundreds of human faces. They exchange dozens of fragmented, superficial text messages. Yet, at the end of the evening, they experience no genuine connection. They only experience deep, pervasive dating fatigue. The sheer volume of accelerated interaction hollows out the meaning of the interaction itself.
And what results is a profound ambivalence at the heart of modern romantic behavior. If you ask the person in Copenhagen what they want, they will tell you they deeply crave an organic connection. They want a decelerated, offline, serendipitous meeting in a bookstore or a coffee shop.
The meet cute.
Right. They long for the friction that gives a relationship meaning and narrative weight. Yet they feel structurally trapped within the digital panopticon. They keep swiping. Because the app has effectively monopolized the local dating ecology. It has destroyed the offline infrastructure of courtship. It is the only remaining centralized marketplace. If you aren't on the exchange, you don't exist.
Which means the market mechanism has completely and successfully captured our emotional lives. But what is truly brilliant and sinister about this system is how it masks its cold mechanics. It doesn't present itself as a trading floor. It presents itself as a fairy tale.
And this brings us to the ultimate critique of how we experience love today. This is what the critical theorists Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer observed when they analyzed the culture industry. They argued that modern society reduces the profound, complex reality of love to mere romance. And they describe this modern romance in a very specific, contradictory way. They called it simultaneously pornographic and prudish.
That phrasing is essential. It is pornographic in its relentless consumption of the physical body. The culture industry commodifies desire. It focuses endlessly on the aesthetic capital we discussed earlier, the perfect bodies, the flawless faces, the raw mechanics of physical attraction.
So it's heavily visual and superficial.
It is pornographic because it reduces the human being to an object of visual consumption.
But at the very same time, it is utterly prudish in its denial of genuine, complex, messy human intimacy. It strips away the vulnerability, the sacrifice, the deep existential entanglement that actual love requires. We don't want the messy reality of another human being's flaws. We want the sanitized, frictionless movie version. We are living under a regime of what we can call commodity romanticism.
Commodity romanticism is how the market solves the problem of the emotional void it created. Because the frictionless market has hollowed out actual emotional depth, modern relationships rely heavily on consumption rituals to simulate that depth.
We benchmark our emotional connection through economic transactions. Think about how a relationship is validated today. It is validated through the luxury vacation to Santorini, heavily documented on social media.
Pics or it didn't happen.
It is validated through the curated $300 dining experience, through aesthetic performances of affection. We use the purchase of commodities to prove to ourselves and the market that our merger is successful.
Because the logic of the marketplace has entirely infiltrated the living room. It's not just the big purchases, it is the everyday interaction. Emotional labor, validation, and attention have become literal currencies. They are continuously measured on a highly sensitive scale of reciprocity. This is the social exchange theory of intimacy, fully actualized.
Explain social exchange theory in the context of two people sitting on a couch on Wednesday night.
Under social exchange theory, every interaction is subconsciously evaluated as a cost or a benefit. If one partner has a bad day and needs to vent, the other partner listens. But that listening is logged as emotional labor, a cost incurred.
Like a debit from the account.
The listening partner expects a reciprocal benefit in the near future. If the utility provided by one partner drops below the expected market rate, if they require too much support, or if they fail to provide enough validation, the relationship is instantly subjected to a ruthless cost-benefit analysis.
And if the math yields a negative spread, the ledger is closed. What is most fascinating is how modern culture actually weaponizes clinical terminology to enforce this strictly transactional nature. We don't just act like cold, rational actors. We use the language of therapy to morally justify it. Pure, self-sacrificing, or unconditional affection, the kind of love that historically built resilient families and deep social bonds, is systematically stripped of its nobility. It is clinically pathologized by pop psychology.
If you love someone unconditionally, if you are willing to suffer for them or endure hardship to maintain the bond, the modern cultural framework does not view you as noble. It labels you as having a lack of boundaries.
It pathologizes your devotion as codependency. This pathologization acts as the ultimate psychological safeguard for the marketplace.
By labeling self-sacrifice as a psychological disorder, the culture ensures that no rational actor ever invests more capital into a relationship than they can reliably extract. It creates a ceiling on emotional investment.
It's risk management for the heart.
It guarantees that the individual remains protected, isolated, and economically rational. It renders them entirely incapable of the irrational, reckless surrender that genuine, transcendent love requires.
Because to surrender unconditionally is to intentionally bankrupt yourself in the emotional market, and the rational actor is programmed to avoid bankruptcy at all costs.
We started by looking at the woman at table 4, assessing the high-risk yield of the man across from her. We moved to the mirror, where the self is packaged as a commodity. We looked at the structural collapse in the courtyards of Zimbabwe, where the biological demand for a penthouse crashes against a market of middle-class homes. And we felt the profound gamified fatigue of the digital panopticon, where the illusion of infinite choice destroys the capacity for commitment. When you pull all of these threads together, the conclusion is inescapable. Love has not been destroyed by the modern world. Rather, it is perfectly adapted to it. Human connection has been successfully distilled into a highly refined, mutually beneficial contract between self-aware, rational actors, forever bound to the fluctuations of the emotional trading floor.